Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Charmonti, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our last program, we talked about providing excellence in education. We will be talking today with two guests about achieving a safe environment. Our guests are Ariel Alvarez, Criminal Justice Specialist for Hillsborough County, and Captain Gene Stokes, District 2 Commander for the Sheriff's Office. Welcome to Beyond Today.
Thank you, Ray.
In the vision for Hillsborough County, we see a time when citizens can move about their community with confidence and a feeling of security. A time when crime has been dealt with effectively, because crime and having a safe environment are high on our list for our citizens. I know you are working on programs that can bring about a feeling of personal safety, and I'd like to talk about some of those programs. But first, I guess I'd like to establish where we are now and what some trends are. And I know community policing is a word that we hear a lot about. What is community policing?
Well, community policing can mean different things to different agencies, and it should, because the communities are different. But basically, it's getting back to a more personalized type of policing. Very similar to the old beat cop, getting out, knowing the people in the neighborhood, knowing the community members, and working together with them to help that community or that neighborhood solve long-term crime problems, to get out of the reactive mode that we're in now with the 11 system, in which we're just purely reacting to crimes that have already occurred. We'd much rather be in a situation where we're preventing or deterring those crimes from occurring.
The criminal justice system, too, I guess, is undergoing changes. Ariel, where are we with changes in the criminal justice system?
Well, we've seen the swing occur, Ray, from a few years ago, a lot of programs to rehabilitate, if you will, and we let our facilities go, our jails and our state prisons and other kinds of detention type facilities. Now the movement is, in fact, to play catch up. We need to have places so that we can detain those individuals that are predators or are violent, and have a place to separate those out from the ones that can be worked with in the community. The problem that we need to guard against is that we don't tie up all of our resources in the area of building jails and prisons, because most of those people get back on the street at some point in time. And so there needs to be a balance between having facilities to properly detain people or lock people up, and at the same time continue to work, particularly with very young children, to prevent having to deal with them as juvenile or adult criminals.
So in your opinion, there clearly has been a shift in the last few years toward more prevention? That's
happening clearly in the state of Florida. The legislature has mandated that inmates in the state system serve 85% of their sentences. That was really important because it was very frustrating for law enforcement and for citizens, the victims of crime, who were being victimized over and over again by a small group of predator kinds of criminals, and they weren't serving any time. They would be right back out on the street again. It was very frustrating to everyone. We realized that didn't work. So the legislature went on a crash building program and has a capacity now to, in fact, keep state inmates for much, much longer portions of their sentence. It provides some true accountability, so that if a court says to this individual, you've committed a serious crime and your record is such that, you know, I'm sentencing you to serve 10 years, for instance, in prison, that in fact the state has provided those facilities to keep those people. We're doing the same thing with juveniles. We had some terrible problems in this community. The media has reported children that were stealing cars, and they stole numerous cars and nothing would happen to them, or other kinds of crimes. And so we need to be able to have programs in place, facilities in place, to detain and confine those individuals that are dangerous. Research indicates that a lot of crime, a lot of the serious crime, is committed by a small percentage of juveniles and adults who repeat it over and over again. And as those are identified, they need to be confined. Now what we need to guard against is it's very expensive to build those facilities and maintain them. We need to make sure that the people, our challenge will be, if you will, in the future will be that we reserve those very expensive facilities for the right people, the predator type, the repeat, the habitual type offenders, the aggressive and dangerous people that need that confinement. But we need not lose sight of the fact that we also need to invest in preventing and doing things that will work with that group, which is a much larger group, fortunately, of individuals that in fact can learn, can get employed, can get educated with some assistance.
I think that is important. Captain Stokes, looking at it from a long-range planning perspective, I guess we get involved in community design a lot, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I understand Sarasota County has some rules that govern how buildings are designed related to crime. Could you talk a little bit about how that works to us?
That basic concept is known as crime prevention through environmental design, and there are some designs that lend itself to at least deterring or reducing the potential for crime, whether it be the height or the position of shrubbery, of landscaping, of walls surrounding a building, or even the number of windows on the front of the building can either enhance or reduce the potential for crime. If you want someone to gather outside of a building, then you're going to make little benches and stuff for them to sit on. If you don't, then you're going to put shrubbery there that will deter them from gathering. Some real basic concepts. Lighting is also a big key in crime prevention, as you might think. In Sarasota County, they've taken it one step further to where they bring in specialists on crime prevention to participate in the permitting process for commercial buildings to ensure that the building is enhanced to its maximum to prevent or deter crime. Is what you're speaking about in Sarasota County.
That does seem like an excellent idea. In your experience, we talk a lot about fences and walls. My understanding is sometimes having like the 6-foot walls around areas doesn't necessarily deter crime, but can provide like a hiding place.
Correct. It can have just the opposite effect. It can have, instead of preventing crime, it can be a place for which criminals can hide, particularly if you have a problem with street level drug dealing in that particular area. You really want the area to be more open than to providing fencing or walls for people to get behind. That's why you'll see much more into a grading effect as opposed to a block or solid wall.
So really that might be a false sense of security to think we can wall ourselves off with a 6-foot concrete wall and kind of stop crime.
Correct. It is a false sense.
You also talked about, I guess, window design too. I would assume having more people being able to see the street is a detriment.
No, it actually it's an enhancement.
Well, a detriment to crime.
A detriment to crime. It's an enhancement to preventing crime. The people inside the building can see, and the people outside can see that they are being observed.
Area, we talked a little bit about the size of things, and we were discussing schools. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Do you feel smaller or larger schools are better when you're dealing with juvenile situations?
I think that that size is an interesting area because there's a certain economy of scale that comes into play. And if you make a school or a juvenile program or an adult prison too small, it's just not cost efficient to operate. The other side, though, and I think it's a worse trend to follow, is that they become large institutions and they're depersonalized and people don't know one another as well as they should, and that's part of what causes change is the interaction. And so I strongly say that we need to not only consider the economy of scale, but also the impact, and there has to be a point after which a school is, or a prison or an institution is too large. And unfortunately, the trend that I see is to build very large facilities. And people get lost in those, and sometimes people that you don't want to get lost in them. So I think that's something that we need to always consider as we cite schools. Schools and neighborhoods used to be a plus. Now we tend to be resistive, and I think one of the reasons for that is they become large, impersonal institutions that have too much activity, too much traffic, and they become a negative as opposed to the positive they should be.
And I think size is important in dealing with the community at large too, with criminal justice too. And we're looking more and more into a geographic assignment of responsibility for even patrol officers. Traditionally, patrol officers and detectives are assigned by time or task. What we're looking at in community policing is assign them to a geographic area of responsibility. The smaller that area is, the better off you are, obviously. So the officer will know the people, and the people in turn will know the officer. And you get that partnership working between those two is when it really becomes effective. But I think size on that scale is important also.
So you're really shrinking the size, for example, that a sheriff might patrol so he knows the people in that neighborhood better?
What, not necessarily shrinking, because that would take more people.
Right.
And again, what we're looking at is changing the way in which you deliver law enforcement services. And we're sort of at the leading edge of that. We're going from a reactive mode into different designs of proactive modes. One of them is to give certain sets of officers, not necessarily all officers, certain sets of officers a geographic assignment of responsibility, so that they're responsible, even though they're not working 24 hours a day, they're expected to keep up with that community, and that community knows who their officer is. That also is a way of deterring non-emergency calls, as opposed to calling for just any deputy. The citizen may wait until they know when their deputy will be working next, in that geographic assignment concept.
So actually that might be more efficient then, with the people knowing the deputies better.
Oh, it absolutely is more efficient, because instead of 7 or 8 deputies responding to the same type of situation over a course of time, just one is handling it. It's obviously going to be more efficient. In Minneapolis, they did a study and found that in their calls for service, about 3% of the addresses were responsible for 50% of the calls, and about 5% were responsible for 65% of the calls. So those are the types of things we're looking at, is eliminating those isolated problems to free up the deputies and the officers to do other things in crime prevention.
Well, it seems like some of the concepts you're talking about fit very well with the type of neighborhood and community level planning we're talking about, the Planning Commission too, trying to prevent the problems before they occur instead of being reactive.
Exactly.
When we return, we'll talk more about criminal justice and the crime situation and its relationship to planning. Thank you.
The Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Board. In 1986, Special Act 86-335 created the Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Board. This act designates the Planning Commission staff to support the Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Board. The Hillsborough River Board and Council are here to serve the community by monitoring activities in the river corridor and protecting the river for its various uses in Temple Terrace, the City of Tampa, and Hillsborough County. The Hillsborough River provides over 70% of this area's drinking water. Thousands of people use the Hillsborough River for recreation, such as boating, fishing, skiing, wildlife studies, and visiting parks. The Hillsborough River is home to numerous animals, including endangered species. Both aquatic and terrestrial wildlife depend on the river's habitat for survival. The Hillsborough River Interlocal Planning Board is dedicated to preserving our water supply, to protecting our wildlife and its habitat, to assuring the river is a safe recreational area. All meetings of the River Board and Council are open to the public. Individuals and groups interested in the river or wishing to help in a project are encouraged to contact the Board and Council at 272-5940. For more information, call the Planning Commission at 272-5940 and ask for Mr. River, or write to the Planning Commission, County Center, Floor 18, P.O. Box 1110, Tampa, Florida 33601.
Welcome back to Beyond Today. I'm your host, Ray Sharmanti, and we have Captain Stokes with us and Ario Alvarez, again, of the Criminal Justice Division of Hillsborough County. And we'd like to touch upon some of the issues we've already discussed. And one of them was the size of some of our institutions, one of which being the schools. I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. You mentioned that you had visited a new school in an adjacent county that was designed a little bit differently, and I wanted you to tell us about that school.
It was a real interesting design. What it did is, in the design of the school, and it was a fairly large school, but it was a middle school and a high school that shared the same campus. But what they did is they took some time in the planning, and for one thing, it didn't look institutional. It had trees and shrubs in such a way that it lent a sense of community within the larger school. And students tended to stay in the same portion of the school for most of their classes. As a result, there was that sense of knowing each other and family that you lose when you get a school with 2,000 or more students. Interestingly, some of the other schools that I've seen, that I've been in, and those that I've seen under construction, we haven't learned all of the lessons I think that we could learn. They're way too large, they're very impersonal and cold, and students are able to move about without being involved in a family sort of sense that I think is so important. In jails, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, through funding received from the Board of County Commissioners in Hillsborough County, is in the process of building 768 beds at the Falkenberg Road jail site. The interesting thing there is that all the latest is being used from a design standpoint in that it will incorporate a concept called direct supervision. Very effective to supervise the people in the jail. It's much more cost effective than older style jails, have fewer problems, and those 768 beds are not going to be under one roof in a large jail. They're going to be in 256 men pods. Again, within that community of that jail, they're safer to work at for staff of the correctional officers and for the inmates. 70% that are in local jails are often there in pre-trial detention. They're just waiting for their day in court. So it's more efficient and economical, and there are fewer problems from a management standpoint by considering the design and keeping the number more manageable through the design.
Just to touch upon that a little more, I know there's been some criticism of newer jails being too nice. I'm not sure that people consider how it functions, and the cost of functioning, how is that compared with a new style jail, with an older style jail?
Ray, that's a good question. Just to give an example, the Morgan Street jail in downtown Tampa is an older style jail. It was built more than 20 years ago, and it's very labor intensive, and the inmates run the cells that they're in, and the correctional officers are at risk when they have to go in those areas. They become islands, and they can be dangerous places to be. Interestingly, in the new concept, which is called direct supervision, the correctional officer is right inside the pod or the jail, the living area with those inmates. So he's interacting with them, kind of like a community policing concept, where you have fewer problems when people know one another as people. Clearly, they have the ability that if they have a person that's dangerous or isn't willing to play by those rules, to take that person out and confine them and lock them down.
So the idea of people knowing each other, we look at it in a neighborhood sense, but even in institutions such as schools and jails, that human trait seems to carry through.
It carries through.
I think it carries through, and I think it's to a detriment in some of our neighborhoods now. We spoke to that earlier. I challenge most of us to know the person that lives 3 doors down from us.
Right.
We tend to know more about the people that we work with than we do we live next door to, and I think that's a symptom of some of the problems in our society of not working together as a community to make sure our community is safe.
Well, I think that brings out the importance of designing the communities in a way where it's very easy for neighbors to know each other, such as having front porches and having windows on the front of your house,
Right.
versus a giant garage door or something that you can't see through. So it probably affects your areas also, the design of the communities, other than just the way the community looks.
You know, Ray, and if I can add to that concept of community in terms of effectiveness in the public safety area, one of the things that we've done in the past, and fortunately we're getting away from for a number of reasons, is that we always expected law enforcement to respond to crimes and take care of our problems in that sense, and schools to do their thing, in the church and so forth. One of the things that we're finding is that we need to have what you referred to earlier as a holistic approach. We need to integrate in a comprehensive sort of way all of those facets where schools and law enforcement and the corrections agencies and the various organizations and families are working together to solve problems and to deal with issues. And a good example of that, The boomer echo, as it's sometimes referred to, is that we have an emerging young population in juveniles that will be the next crime wave. They're also, the unfortunate thing there is that the forecasts are that it's going to be more violent and more drug involved. So the challenges are going to be there. It won't be for just law enforcement to respond to a 911 call. It won't be enough. Or for a school to say, take care of these children in a school with 2,000 plus children. People are going to have to work together. And a good example of that is what's happening in the area of gangs. There are a number of reasons why children and juveniles and young adults ban into gangs, but we know that it's a real problem and that you have to stay on top of it. Well, the way to solve it, it's not a law enforcement issue, it's a neighborhood, school, law enforcement, corrections. You put that all together in an integrated sort of way.
And I think we sell our neighborhoods too short. When we first moved into the Nucio area with a community station, we did some surveys with the help of the University of South Florida to determine the acceptability to that style of policing and the expectations of it and the expectations of the citizens themselves. And that first year we asked, one of the questions we asked was, do you see you have a responsibility to assist the sheriff's office in crime prevention? 5% of the residents said yes. After a year of working in that community, forming community councils, putting on some crime prevention seminars, we went back in with a follow-up survey a year later, and 48% said yes to the same answer, to the same question. That's a remarkable turnaround in 1 year, but it shows that a community will be responsive if it's given the opportunity to be responsive.
So you've gotten good response to the community policing then overall?
Yes, I think we have excellent response, particularly in those areas in which we've been able to go in and through either donations or through funding, through grants, establish a small community station. It's almost symbolic, and it makes people realize that there's a focus in that community and a commitment to community safety.
Talking a little bit about crime rates, generally what has been the trend over the last 10 years with crime rates? I know we're bombarded by the media with all these terrible stories every night on the news. I mean, but what are the real statistics?
Generally over the last 10 years, generally nationwide, we've seen a decrease, a slow decrease. In the last year to year and a half, we started seeing the upswing. I agree with Ariel. I think a lot of that has to do with demographics. We're starting to have a larger number of particularly males between the age of 15 and 25, and those are traditionally the people that commit more of the crime. And I think, unfortunately, we'll see an increase in crime over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years.
I think that's an interesting fact. I'm not sure people realize that the demographics of a particular population can have an effect on crime.
And that's why I think it's more important to double our efforts in areas other than just reaction. The answer isn't to go out and hire more police officers and more deputies and throw them at reacting to the crime. The answer is to help those communities mobilize themselves and to where they mutually help control the safety of their community.
One of the things we discussed, I think there is a tendency for people maybe to get more involved, especially with communications and cell phones and our whole 911 system. And we were discussing usually when there's an accident or something occurs that you get a lot of calls on 911. What typically happens?
Well, typically, and this is in urban areas where cell phones are popular, throughout the United States, an accident on an expressway or interstate will generate about 20 911 calls. Now, those are people thinking they're doing good, and individually they are. And we don't want to discourage people from calling. What we're looking at is potentially developing systems to divert those calls in some other way, away from an emergency system. Some agencies in the Northeast are looking at a 311 system in which people would know they're calling in with administrative type information as opposed to emergency situations. But as the technology grows, we're going to have to change to address it.
So, for example, if they saw a car broken down or something, they might use this alternative system. Correct. Since it wasn't an emergency.
Correct. And that's not going to cut down on the total number of calls, but it will be handled more efficiently.
It's interesting that you bring up cell phones because overall, I guess, do you feel that that has a positive effect on the crime situation?
Oh, I think so. There's been a number of situations when people using cell phones were able to report crimes and officers were able to respond and act on them. So on a whole, I think any communications with the police is a positive in deterring crime.
There's another point to that, though, Ray, if I can add, which is that while that technology is there and it's easy to make that call, one of the things that isn't happening as much and needs to happen, I think, to make communities safe is that involvement of people in their community. And it's easy to pick up, we're talking about cell phones, but it's easy to pick up an instrument like that and make a call and then keep moving. It's just it's impersonal. And what we really need to solve community problems and crime problems to enhance the safety for all of us is, in fact, for the things that we've been talking about in your show, which is that there's no easy way around people being involved in the problem. It's not a school problem or a law enforcement problem or an institutional problem of some sort. It's our problem, and the way to solve that, it's assisted by making that first call, but then it has to move to a much broader level of involvement. And we've talked about the environment of our buildings and homes and so forth, and of our schools and jails, but the level has to be, there's no substitute for personal involvement in community issues and problems.
I think that's a point that's come out throughout the show, and I find that very interesting as a planner, because that's a lot of the issues we talk about, is trying to create communities where neighbors know each other better. I didn't realize it pervaded as far into issues such as crime or schools as it does, but just discussing some of the issues, you can really see how we have to look at things comprehensively and ahead of time and kind of plan ahead rather than react. And I think, unfortunately, we've been in the reaction mode for a long time. Do you see any developments coming, since this is about the future, what developments in crime or criminal justice do you see coming over the next 5 or 10 years?
I really see an enhancement or increasement in the community policing philosophy, because it very much deals with supporting those institutions that in years past served our society very well. Those institutions such as schools, churches, families. Community policing works to prop up or help those institutions continue to maintain control in our society much more effectively than just reacting in an incident-driven system does. So some of the things that you're seeing in isolated areas now, and in some agencies just a specialized little unit, you're going to see become more and more widespread as a way of delivering police services. You know, years ago we were used to getting milk delivered to the door. We don't deliver milk to the door anymore. There's a whole different system. That may sound trivial to compare delivering milk to other types of services, but that's a service delivery system that has completely changed over the course of the last 20 years.
Well, I'd like to thank today's guests. We could probably go on a lot longer, but we've run out of time, for talking to us about crime prevention and our community's safety and creating a safe environment, really, which is what we're here for. Next month, we're going to talk about strengthening families and social services. I'm Ray Sharmonti, and on behalf of the Planning Commission, I thank you for tuning in to and thinking beyond today.